Elena was folding laundry on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Her small apartment filled with the soft hum of the washing machine and the faint scent of detergent, the sunlight streaming through the windows warming the room in gentle streaks, when a sudden, hesitant knock on the door made her pause mid-fold, her fingers tightening on the edge of a freshly folded shirt, heart skipping an unexpected beat, because the building was usually calm, silent except for the occasional footsteps in the hallway. And visitors were rare, leaving her to enjoy her own company, her thoughts drifting through memories of a long week, of emails sent, errands run, moments she had felt unnoticed, moments she had longed for connection. Yet she had grown accustomed to her routine, finding comfort in the ordinary rhythm of her life. But now that knock, soft and tentative, stirred something unfamiliar, a flutter of anticipation mingled with curiosity, and as she walked to the door, the wood cool beneath her fingertips, she wondered who could possibly be standing there, her mind racing through possibilities, imagining friends or neighbors with small favors or forgotten packages. Yet none of the usual explanations seemed to fit the hesitation she had heard, the way the knock lingered, almost shy, almost expectant, and when she opened the door, she found herself looking into the warm, familiar eyes of Lucas, her neighbor from across the hall, a man she had admired quietly from a distance for months, someone who seemed to move through the building with quiet confidence, always polite, always present yet never intrusive, and seeing him now, standing there with a nervous smile, her heart stuttered, the air between them shifting in an instant, thick with unspoken words and possibilities, and he looked hesitant, almost unsure, as if he had rehearsed what to say and still feared the wrong words might escape. "Hi, can I come in for a minute?" he asked softly, voice carrying that mix of vulnerability and quiet charm that made her stomach twist with a strange, exciting tension, and Elena felt a shiver, a sense that the ordinary day she had expected to pass uneventfully was about to change in ways she could not yet predict. And as she stepped aside to let him in, she noticed the subtle nervousness in his movements, the way he avoided her gaze briefly before daring to meet her eyes again, and she felt a mixture of curiosity, caution, and an unacknowledged thrill, because this man, who had always seemed like a distant presence, now occupied her space, her home, and it felt intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken, and as he crossed the threshold, shedding the faint chill of the autumn air from his jacket, she wondered what had brought him here, what words might follow, what secrets might lie behind his sudden visit. And Lucas moved into her living room, his hands brushing against the edge of furniture, eyes scanning the room as if to anchor himself in the unfamiliarity of someone else's home, and they exchanged polite smiles, small gestures that carried weight, and she tried to keep her voice steady as she offered him a chair, feeling the flutter of her heartbeat echo in her chest, aware of every small sound in the room, the hum of the city outside, the rustle of the laundry she had left untouched, the subtle scent of her own perfume mingling with the freshness of the detergent, and as he settled down, shifting slightly as if to find comfort, he began to speak, first in casual tones, about the day, about errands, about minor inconveniences that might have otherwise been trivial. Yet every word felt charged, every pause stretched, and Elena found herself leaning in slightly, drawn not just by the conversation but by the presence, the warmth of someone who seemed to understand without needing to explain. And Lucas's voice softened as he admitted he had been thinking about her, about the times they had crossed paths in the hallway, about moments that felt fleeting but significant, and Elena felt a strange, thrilling connection, realizing that the admiration she had quietly harbored from afar was being met with something equally tender, equally alive, and she smiled, a little nervously, heart-pounding, unsure if she was ready for what this might mean, yet unable to resist the pull she felt toward him, toward the unspoken possibility, and as the minutes passed, they shared small confessions, laughter that was light and genuine, stories about their routines, about dreams deferred and hopes nurtured quietly, and Elena found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, talking about her own quiet struggles, her own longing for connection, her own moments of loneliness, and Lucas listened, truly listened, his eyes never leaving hers, his expression shifting subtly as he absorbed her words, nodding, smiling, offering small comments that made her feel seen, a feeling so rare it almost made her dizzy, and the room seemed to shrink around them, closing off the rest of the world, leaving just the two of them in a bubble of warmth, curiosity, and the delicious tension of shared understanding, and she noticed the way he fidgeted slightly with his hands, the way he avoided the temptation to reach out and touch, the restraint that spoke of respect, of awareness, and yet, the longing in his gaze mirrored her own, a reflection of feelings neither had dared to voice before, and as the sunlight shifted, casting shadows across the floor, Elena felt the ordinary afternoon transform. Ordinary laundry and routine dissolved into a moment pregnant with possibility, a moment that seemed to stretch, delicate and fragile, like glass that might shatter or shine brilliantly if handled with care. And she realized with a mixture of fear and excitement that this visit, brief and unexpected, had altered something deep within her, had opened a door in her heart she hadn't known existed. And before she could gather her thoughts, Lucas's expression shifted slightly, a cloud passing over the warmth of his face, and she sensed the shadow of worry or urgency, something he hadn't yet voiced, and her curiosity spiked, heart racing, pulse hammering as she asked softly, "Is everything okay?" And he hesitated, hands clasped loosely in his lap, eyes flicking toward the window, toward the mundane world outside that suddenly felt distant and irrelevant, and then he said almost in a whisper, "I'm glad I came," leaving her with a fluttering sense of anticipation and the realization that the ordinary day she had expected, laundry folded, errands completed, quiet moments alone, had been irrevocably changed by a single knock, by a single visit, by a presence that stirred her heart and mind in ways she hadn't anticipated. And as he spoke, she felt the first stirrings of something tender, something thrilling, a connection that could grow, a story that might unfold, and she knew deep in that quiet Sunday afternoon that her life, simple and predictable moments, had become a canvas for something new, something exciting, something intimate, delicate, and full of potential. And yet as she met his eyes, she felt the suspense, the question lingering in the air, unsaid but palpable, what brought him here, why now, and what would come next, leaving Elena suspended in a sweet, nervous anticipation, heart beating in rapid, excited rhythms, knowing that whatever unfolded from this unexpected knock would leave its mark, delicate and indelible, on her heart. In the days to come, Lucas settled into Elena's living room, still carrying the subtle tension of the unexpected visit, and as he glanced around, taking in the modest comfort of her home, he felt a mix of nervousness and excitement, realizing that this was not just a casual knock on the door but a moment that could shift the rhythm of both their lives. The sunlight had begun to fade, casting warm golden streaks across the room, illuminating the faint dust motes that danced lazily in the air. And Elena noticed the way his eyes lingered on small details, the picture frame on her shelf, the stack of books by the couch, the softness of the blanket draped over the chair, and she felt a strange thrill in seeing him attentive, present, yet careful not to intrude, as though he were stepping gently through a fragile space she had carved for herself, a space of solitude that rarely invited company. Their conversation began with cautious, ordinary topics, Lucas asking about her week, commenting on small tasks she had accomplished, and Elena responding with polite smiles and short answers. But soon the words shifted, drifting toward personal stories, revealing layers that neither had shared with anyone else, and Lucas spoke of how lonely the city could feel, how the tall buildings and crowded streets often seemed to emphasize the absence of connection, and Elena nodded, relating to the quiet ache he described, the feeling of being surrounded by people yet invisible, and she spoke softly of her own struggles, the moments of longing she had carried silently, the times she had yearned for someone to see her without judgment, to acknowledge the small victories and quiet heartaches that filled her days. As they spoke, the initial awkwardness melted, replaced by a warm intimacy that neither forced nor expected, and Lucas's eyes softened when she smiled, his lips curving into gentle expressions of understanding and encouragement, and Elena noticed the slight tension in his shoulders easing, the hesitation in his gestures giving way to subtle confidence, yet still careful, still measured, as though each movement mattered in the delicate balance they were creating between them. Laughter began to emerge, light and unself-conscious, sparked by small observations, shared memories, and the gentle absurdities of daily life, and Elena felt herself relax, heart fluttering with the realization that this connection, this unexpected moment, was rare, tender and precious, a delicate thread weaving them together in ways words could only begin to describe. Lucas, in turn, shared glimpses of his past, moments of uncertainty, times when he had felt adrift, and Elena listened intently, sensing the vulnerability beneath his composed exterior, the humanity that made him relatable, a person with dreams, fears, and quiet moments of longing just like hers, and she felt a gentle pull toward him, an unspoken recognition that their lives, once parallel but distant, were beginning to intersect in meaningful, intimate ways. As the conversation deepened, the silence between sentences became comfortable, almost magnetic, filled with the electricity of unspoken understanding, and Elena realized she was drawn not only to his words but to his presence, the way he seemed to occupy the room with a calm energy that invited trust, the way his eyes searched hers for signs of honesty, warmth, and perhaps something more, something they both felt but neither dared name yet. The afternoon slipped into evening, the golden light fading into soft twilight, and Lucas leaned back slightly, hands clasped loosely in his lap, watching Elena fold a stray napkin, noticing the gentle concentration on her face, the subtle expressions that revealed her thoughts, and he felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, to bridge the gap between them with a touch or a confession, yet restraint held him back, a respectful hesitation that made his attraction more poignant, more charged, because every pause, every fleeting glance, seemed to carry unspoken meaning, and Elena felt it too, a quiet flutter in her chest, the kind that accompanies the realization that someone else sees you, truly sees you, and the recognition is thrilling and terrifying at the same time. As they continued to talk, Lucas began to reveal small dreams, hopes he rarely shared, the kind of intimate thoughts people usually keep to themselves, and Elena responded with encouragement, a gentle smile, her voice soft, nurturing, creating a space where vulnerability felt safe, where emotions could breathe, and in that moment the distance that had existed between them evaporated, leaving only the warmth of two people discovering the fragile, tender possibility of connection. The room seemed suspended in time, the faint ticking of a clock and the soft hum of the city outside fading into the background, leaving an atmosphere dense with anticipation, quiet longing, and a budding sense of trust, and Elena realized that this conversation, this ordinary act of sharing space and words, was more meaningful than any encounter she had experienced in months, because it was not just about words but about the resonance between hearts, the subtle recognition that someone else could understand, care, and perhaps desire to be close. Lucas's voice softened further, tinged with a vulnerability that made Elena's heart ache in a sweet, magnetic way, as he admitted small insecurities, the ways he sometimes doubted himself, and she reached out instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from her face with a shy smile, a gesture that spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement that she too had fears, hopes, and a longing for understanding, and in that shared moment of openness, the tension that had hovered in the room transformed into something warm, inviting, and profoundly human, a tender intimacy that neither of them had expected when the knock had first echoed through her door. Time seemed elastic, moments stretching and contracting, filled with the ebb and flow of conversation, laughter, subtle gestures, and the quiet exchange of emotions that transcended words, and Elena found herself leaning slightly toward Lucas, drawn by the gravity of this connection, captivated by the sincerity in his eyes, the gentle cadence of his speech, and the way he seemed to notice the smallest details about her, as if she mattered in ways she had not realized. Yet just as the warmth of intimacy settled, the safe cocoon of shared vulnerability seemed complete. Lucas's phone buzzed on the table, breaking the rhythm abruptly, and the light in his eyes flickered with a shadow of concern, a reminder of the outside world pressing against the fragile, burgeoning connection between them, and Elena's chest tightened with curiosity and a hint of fear, wondering what could possibly intrude on this delicate moment, and he picked up the phone briefly, his expression shifting subtly, a storm of emotions crossing his face, hesitation, worry, and something unsaid that made her pulse quicken. He set the phone down, looking at her with a mixture of apology and reluctance, and whispered, "I have to go," leaving Elena suspended in a swirl of emotions, a mixture of disappointment, longing, and the thrill of knowing that something significant had begun, yet remained unfinished, unclaimed, and beautifully tentative. She nodded, understanding the gravity of the moment without needing to probe further, the air heavy with unspoken feelings, the room seeming smaller, more intimate, as if it held the memory of their closeness and the promise of what could come next. And as Lucas stepped toward the door, Elena felt a flutter in her stomach, a subtle ache of longing, a magnetic pull that made her wish the moment could stretch indefinitely, that time could pause to savor the intensity of connection that had sparked between them. And when the door closed behind him, a soft click echoing in the apartment, she leaned against it briefly, heart racing, eyes misting slightly with the weight of anticipation and curiosity, realizing that ordinary days could hold extraordinary moments, that a simple knock could unravel a predictable routine and replace it with something delicate, thrilling, and profoundly transformative. And as she returned to her laundry, folding each piece with more care than before, her mind replayed every word, every glance, every subtle gesture, and she found herself smiling softly, a quiet warmth spreading through her chest, knowing that the echo of Lucas's presence would linger, shaping the rhythm of her coming days, a tender reminder that human connection, when it arrives unexpectedly, can shift everything, awaken dormant feelings, and plant the seeds of something beautiful and potentially life-changing, leaving her suspended in the delicate tension of what was, what had begun, and the unspoken promise of what might follow. And as the sun dipped completely, leaving shadows across the apartment, she sat quietly, heart full, mind racing, imagining the next knock on her door, the next moment that could bring the fragile, exquisite possibility of love, intimacy, and deep understanding into her ordinary world, a world forever changed by one soft, hesitant knock that had carried with it the potential to rewrite her heart's quiet story. Days passed since that afternoon when Lucas had knocked on Elena's door, and though the encounter had been brief, the memory lingered in her mind like a soft echo, a quiet hum of possibility that made her mornings feel different, her routines slightly more alive, her heart attuned to subtle shifts in the world around her. Each time she walked through the hallway of their apartment building, her gaze unconsciously sought his door, wondering if he was there, wondering if he thought of her as much as she thought of him. And when they finally met in passing, brief and unplanned, the simple hello carried an undercurrent of longing, an unspoken recognition of shared moments, and she noticed the way his eyes lingered a second longer than necessary, the faint brush of hands as they passed in the narrow hallway, a fleeting, almost electric sensation that sent warmth surging through her chest, a feeling she had never quite experienced before, the mixture of excitement, anticipation, and a hint of vulnerability that comes when two hearts begin to recognize each other in quiet ways. As the days turned into a week, they began to exchange small pleasantries, conversations that started cautiously, lingering in the mundane, yet carrying with them the weight of shared understanding, and Elena felt herself growing bolder, imagining scenarios in which they might speak for longer, linger together, allow moments to stretch into possibilities. And Lucas, too, seemed drawn to her, seeking brief encounters in the hallway, offering small smiles that carried subtle invitations, gestures of warmth and curiosity that hinted at a deeper interest, a desire to bridge the distance that had always existed between them, the invisible walls of ordinary neighborly interaction slowly eroding in the presence of mutual attraction. One evening, Elena found herself in the courtyard, arranging flowers she had bought for herself, a simple ritual to celebrate small joys, when she noticed Lucas across the way, leaning against the railing, seemingly lost in thought, yet aware of her presence, and their eyes met, holding for a moment longer than polite custom dictated, and in that silence, a shared understanding passed between them, a recognition of longing, of a connection that neither could fully articulate yet both felt deeply, and she felt a fluttering warmth, a nervous excitement that made her fingers tremble slightly as she adjusted a petal in her bouquet. Wishing the moment could linger, wishing the ordinary world could pause, creating a bubble where only they existed, two souls drawn together by curiosity, attraction, and the subtle threads of vulnerability they had begun to weave between them. Over the next few days, chance encounters became more frequent, brief conversations stretching into longer exchanges, moments filled with laughter, shared stories, and glimpses of personal struggles, each revelation making them feel closer, more attuned to one another. And Elena began to recognize the pattern of her own heart's response, the quickened pulse, the light flush in her cheeks, the anticipatory excitement that rose whenever she heard his knock, or saw him across the hallway, or imagined his presence near her. And Lucas too seemed changed, gentler in his words, more careful in his gestures, his usual confidence tempered by a tenderness that had emerged from the shared moments, and in those interactions, neither could deny the growing magnetic pull, the sense that something significant was unfolding quietly but inevitably, and yet both hesitated, aware that the world outside their small connection carried obligations, distractions, and uncertainties, and that acting too quickly might shatter the fragile intimacy they were cultivating, making every glance, every word, every shared silence a precious, tentative step forward in a dance neither had rehearsed. One rainy afternoon, Elena lingered by her window, watching droplets race along the glass, and she imagined Lucas walking across the hall, the soft rhythm of his footsteps echoing in her mind. And in that daydream, she realized how much she had begun to care, how much she longed for the moments they shared, and how the absence of his presence made her days feel heavier, her laughter quieter, her thoughts wandering into possibilities both thrilling and terrifying. Lucas, meanwhile, found himself replaying their conversations in his own mind, analyzing her expressions, her reactions, the subtle shifts in tone. And he understood that he was not merely drawn to her beauty or charm but to the essence of her being, the sincerity and depth that radiated in small gestures, and he felt an unfamiliar vulnerability, a need to approach carefully, to honor the growing connection. Yet the intensity of his feelings made restraint difficult, and he found himself searching for excuses to linger, to speak longer, to find shared spaces where the conversation could flow unguarded, where silence was not awkward but intimate. And in each of these small moments, the tension between desire and decorum heightened, creating an emotional landscape rich with possibility and fragile enough that a single misstep could shatter it. As days became weeks, the anticipation grew, the quiet longing becoming almost tangible, manifesting in small rituals. Elena leaving her door slightly ajar to see if he might stop by, Lucas finding reasons to pause in her hallway, exchanging casual words that carried the weight of deeper meaning, each interaction layered with subtext, subtle questions and the thrill of potential, and they both felt the delicious agony of not knowing what the other felt, yet sensing that it mirrored their own emotions, a magnetic pull neither could resist. One evening, Elena prepared a small meal for herself, the aroma filling her kitchen, and she imagined Lucas entering, sharing the food, laughing, teasing, creating a private world where ordinary life could dissolve into moments of intimacy. And the fantasy was sweet, thrilling, and frightening in its intensity because it made her realize how deeply she cared, how much she yearned for connection beyond fleeting glances and brief exchanges. Lucas, in parallel, replayed his own imagined scenarios, feeling the pull toward her, the unspoken desire to bridge the gap, to transform the subtle tension into something tangible. And yet he hesitated, weighed by the awareness of propriety, timing, and the fragility of first impressions, each moment of closeness intensified by the awareness that their bond was still nascent, still delicate, and must be nurtured with care. The emotional tension built like a slow crescendo, culminating one afternoon when Elena found a note slipped under her door, simple, carefully written, expressing that Lucas had been thinking of her, that he had appreciated their moments together, that he looked forward to seeing her again. And reading the words, Elena felt her heart swell, warmth spreading through her chest, anticipation mingling with nervous excitement, and she realized that the unspoken feelings between them were no longer solitary. Lucas, meanwhile, felt relief mixed with exhilaration, knowing that his own emotions had been received, that the fragile connection they had begun to cultivate was recognized, reciprocated, and ripe for exploration. And in that realization, both of them felt the intensity of longing, the thrill of possibility, and the delicious uncertainty of what might come next. As evening fell, the city lights flickering on outside, Elena and Lucas crossed paths in the hallway again, their eyes meeting with an unspoken greeting, a smile shared, hands brushing lightly as they exchanged the note, and the warmth of contact made hearts beat faster, the magnetic pull undeniable, the silent promise of connection electrifying, yet tempered by hesitation, because both understood that every choice, every gesture, carried weight, and that patience might be just as important as courage in nurturing what was blooming between them. And as they parted for the night, each returning to their respective apartments, the tension lingered, the longing persisted, the imagination alive with possibilities, and in their separate spaces, both replayed the events of the past days, analyzing expressions, replaying words, imagining future encounters, their thoughts tangled with desire, curiosity, and the gentle ache of emotional intimacy slowly unfolding, knowing that the ordinary world had transformed into a stage for something extraordinary, a tender, delicate romance blossoming quietly, full of suspense, longing, and hope, waiting for the next moment, the next knock, the next conversation to deepen, expand, and reveal the emotions that had begun to bind their hearts together, leaving both Elena and Lucas suspended in the sweet tension of what could be, hearts full of expectation, minds alive with dreams, and a quiet, thrilling certainty that life was shifting irrevocably, beautifully, and irresistibly toward something meaningful and unforgettable. One rainy evening, Elena returned home with a small bouquet of wildflowers she had bought for herself, their bright colors standing out against the gray drizzle, and as she approached her apartment door, she noticed a familiar figure standing just beyond the threshold, drenched in the soft, rhythmic patter of rain, and her heart skipped a beat, recognizing Lucas instantly, his hair damp, jacket clinging to his shoulders, yet his face illuminated by a smile that carried a mixture of relief, nervousness, and quiet excitement, a combination that made her chest ache with anticipation and longing, and she realized in that instant that the ordinary apartment corridor, usually silent and unremarkable, had transformed into a place charged with tension, possibility, and something tender that neither of them had fully named. Lucas held out an envelope with a slight tremble in his fingers, as if the words inside might change everything, and Elena's curiosity surged, a fluttering sensation spreading through her chest, a mix of excitement and uncertainty, because she knew that this envelope, small and unassuming, contained not just words but the potential to bridge the delicate gap between them, to reveal feelings long held in quiet observation and subtle glances, and she felt a shiver of anticipation as she extended her hand, brushing briefly against his, feeling the warmth of his skin through the drizzle, and in that fleeting contact, a spark seemed to leap across, a magnetic connection neither could deny. They stepped inside together, leaving the rain and the world's concerns behind, the apartment suddenly intimate and warm, filled with the soft scent of flowers and the faint aroma of rain lingering on Lucas's coat, and Elena placed the bouquet carefully on the small kitchen table, arranging the petals as she looked up, meeting his gaze, and saw the depth of emotion reflected in his eyes, a mixture of longing, vulnerability, and something beautiful that she recognized immediately as mutual, an acknowledgement of the tender bond that had been forming over the past weeks through glances, touches, shared silences, and the quiet rhythm of growing affection, and she realized that despite the uncertainty, despite the fears and hesitation, something significant was unfolding, a connection rich with possibility, intimacy, and hope. Lucas, standing across from her, took a deep breath, hands slightly shaking, and began to speak softly, carefully, the words chosen with care. "I've been thinking a lot since that day I knocked on your door." And Elena felt her heart beat faster. Anticipation mingled with a gentle fear of disappointment because she had imagined this moment countless times, yet now that it had arrived, the weight of reality made every second stretch, the room quiet except for the soft rain tapping against the window, the hum of the city muted, as if the world itself were holding its breath, and she listened intently, feeling every nuance in his voice, every flicker of expression, every subtle hesitation, because she knew that within these moments lay the potential to transform their relationship, to turn long-held curiosity and attraction into something tangible, heartfelt, and lasting. As he spoke, Lucas explained how he had felt drawn to her from the first casual encounters, how the brief moments in the hallway, the shy smiles, the gentle touches, had sparked something he could not ignore, a feeling of recognition, of connection that went beyond attraction, something rare and tender, and Elena, hearing his words, felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief, joy, and excitement, knowing that her own feelings, her quiet admiration and longing, were mirrored in him, that the emotions she had carefully guarded, uncertain of reciprocation, were safe, acknowledged, and equally potent in his heart, and she realized in that moment that the distance, hesitation, and waiting had only deepened the meaning of their connection, making it more profound, more delicate, and more precious. Lucas stepped closer, a careful movement that conveyed intention without rush, and Elena felt her pulse quicken, a nervous exhilaration that made her stomach flutter as their eyes met, searching for reassurance, for mutual understanding, and in the shared gaze, they found a quiet affirmation, a recognition that what had begun in tentative glances and casual conversations was blossoming into something rich, tender, and full of potential, a story they could write together slowly with care, respect, and genuine emotion. The envelope remained between them for a moment, a symbol of words unspoken and feelings only now being named, and Lucas finally extended it toward her, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange, a subtle electric contact that made her heart race, and Elena took it with a gentle smile, feeling the significance of the gesture, knowing that inside lay confessions, thoughts, and perhaps promises that could shape the next chapter of their lives, and she felt a delicate thrill, a surge of hope that this quiet, ordinary apartment had become the stage for extraordinary change, a place where two hearts could meet, hesitate, explore, and ultimately recognize a shared longing that was both exhilarating and comforting. They sat together, close but not rushed, sharing the space with the quiet intimacy of people discovering each other, and as Lucas spoke further, revealing small hopes for the future, gentle confessions of admiration, and the subtle ways he had noticed her, Elena felt her own feelings rise to the surface, unguarded, sincere, and beautifully vulnerable, and she responded in kind, sharing her thoughts, her quiet excitement at the connection they had nurtured, the little details she had observed about him, the warmth and kindness that had drawn her in, and the conversation flowed naturally, effortlessly, filled with laughter, soft pauses, and the tender recognition of two people slowly weaving their hearts together, aware of the fragile, thrilling possibilities yet confident in the honesty and care that underpinned their growing bond. As the evening deepened, the rain outside creating a soft rhythmic backdrop, the light inside the apartment cast gentle shadows, the colors of the flowers bright and alive, the small space alive with presence, warmth and energy. Lucas and Elena shared subtle touches, hands brushing over the envelope, shoulders almost touching, the electricity of proximity building in a way that was tender, respectful, and profoundly moving, and every gesture, every look, every smile carried weight, signaling mutual interest, admiration, and a growing trust that both thrilled and humbled them. And in the quiet of that rainy evening, they recognized the potential for something lasting, meaningful, and deeply personal, a connection that could grow into companionship, understanding, and intimacy built on genuine care, respect, and shared vulnerability. As the night continued, the conversation drifted seamlessly from memories to hopes, fears to small dreams, and in each exchange, the depth of their emotional bond became more evident, and Elena found herself marveling at how a single knock, an ordinary gesture, had led to a profound transformation in her emotional landscape, how curiosity and attraction had evolved into recognition and understanding, and how the moments they had spent together had created a foundation for something beautiful, tender, and rare, a bond that transcended ordinary acquaintance and hinted at the extraordinary possibilities of love and companionship. Lucas, feeling the warmth of shared understanding, the thrill of mutual attraction, and the satisfaction of vulnerability met with kindness, realized that his own heart had shifted, that the connection with Elena was no longer a tentative curiosity but a deeply felt, mutual recognition, and he allowed himself to hope, to imagine, to envision a future where their lives intertwined, where the simple gestures of daily life could be infused with tenderness, playfulness, and the comforting security of emotional intimacy. And he found courage in the shared vulnerability, in the smiles, the soft laughter, and the quiet moments of togetherness, knowing that each step forward could strengthen the bond, deepen the affection, and transform their ordinary days into something extraordinary, meaningful, and memorable. And as the rain outside tapered to a gentle drizzle, the night growing quiet, Lucas and Elena sat together in that small apartment, hearts full, minds alive with the possibilities, realizing that their story had only just begun, that the tentative glances, the shy touches, the quiet confessions, and the shared silences were the first chapter of something extraordinary, and the envelope between them, now fully integrated into their shared space, symbolized not just the words it contained but the trust, hope, and affection that had been nurtured. And as they looked at each other, smiles soft, eyes glistening with emotion, the unspoken understanding was clear. The ordinary world had transformed, their hearts had shifted, and the delicate, thrilling journey of togetherness had begun, promising moments of laughter, tenderness, understanding, and love, leaving both Elena and Lucas suspended in the exquisite anticipation of what would come next, hearts intertwined in a quiet, profound recognition that some connections are worth waiting for, worth nurturing, and capable of turning the simplest, most ordinary moments, a knock, a shared conversation, a bouquet of flowers, into the extraordinary experience of finding someone who sees you, understands you, and inspires your heart to hope, to dream, and to love.